want to remind folks who are on the Google Meet to mute your microphones. And if you are viewing via live stream, there's no need to mute. If you would benefit from closed captioning, you will find that option on the bottom menu bar. We will be recording this session, and it will be available on the DHRM website. It will also be emailed to all of you who registered. So after today's webinar, we will be emailing attendees a survey, and we'd appreciate your feedback. Thank you to our many audience members who submitted questions for today, and today's content is based on the questions we received. And time permitting, we'll explore a few more during our Q&A. Well, I'm excited to introduce our presenters, Cameron McBride and Carol Ward. Cameron is the CEO of Blomquist Hale. He has spent his career specializing in healthcare operations and the impact an organization's processes have on its success. Cameron earned a Bachelor of Science from Utah State University and an MBA from the University of Utah. Cameron and his wife have 4 children, ages 19 to 11. In addition to spending time with his family, Cameron enjoys building, repairing, and riding motorcycles. Carol Ann Ward is a clinical mental health counselor and a certified family life educator with master experience in teaching relationship skills, overall well-being, anger management, substance abuse, anxiety coping skills, and parenting skills. She is trained in trauma-focused practices, attachment, and in family dynamics. Outside the office, she enjoys the outdoors, hiking, gardening, music, and spending time with her blended family of 7 kids and 2 grandkids. Carol and Cameron, welcome. Shall we get started?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, JJ.
Okay, so so here we go. We've got a few slides here for you that we can go through. We're going to go through some information, some definitions of a few things that you guys have requested, along with some questions, and then the majority will be some questions that we're going to answer. I have, to start off with, I put our YouTube channel in the chat that gives you more workshops. So about a year ago, right, after COVID, we started putting our workshops recorded on YouTube, so then they're there for everybody and anybody that can watch. So as I refer to a couple things, I'm going to say, oh yeah, there's a sleep hygiene workshop, or there's a Thinking Errors 101 workshop, and so you can get more information there and go further with this. And at the end of the PowerPoint, there's several books that I've referenced to this material, so you can also check that out when you get the PowerPoint and the video that you're going to get later. So any of that will hopefully be helpful. So we're going to start with just a little bit of what Blomquist does, and we can answer some questions at the end about this. But this is just here. If you're new or not familiar with all of our services, of course, and Cameron can touch on this a little bit. But here's a list of just the basics that we do through, the assistant program. Of course, we're doing Zoom and video calls and therapy sessions, the workshops, and just family therapy for anyone in your household is included for free in your program. So it's an awesome resource that we can all use, in different ways. So the 3 C's of the brain. So we have to start. I'm a brain person here with like therapy and how our brain functions, because it has everything to do with our nervous system. And so, we're going to go over, burnout and how to seek to understand, and how with change, how do we find clarity? Because that's the first step. Because when we don't have clarity, we jump to conclusions, we make up story, we go to big thinking our stories that really adds to our anxiety, adds to our ruminating about what's going to happen because we don't know. So clarity's number 1. We have to just know what that means, and then we connect the dots, and then we have connection as a human in the brain, connection with humans, and then that gives us control. So when we feel powerless, it's because we didn't have clarity and we didn't have connection, for sure. So just a little, puzzle piece there for you to think about. So I kind of had this like new epiphany of one of my clients, and so she can coin it or someone else has coined it, but I'm coining it now. But it's face it till we make it. So it's like, do we want to fake it till we make it? No, we don't. It doesn't work. Stuffing doesn't work. Because we just like, it's better to face things. So when we get into burnout or other things or depression, I mean, it's a coping mechanism. It's actually a defense mechanism that we don't face it. So I'm all about facing it. So we'll talk about some things like that today. So back to the brain connection, right? So we must do some things here to regulate our physiological body. We need to create an environment that's safe and that we can have a thriving, a way to have like in a meeting, we have to have a safe way to be in the frontal lobes and have understanding and get to what it is that we need clarity on, especially through change when there's like, oh, I don't understand how this is going to help move us forward. So I'll talk about, the fight or flight the stress response. We can't ignore that. We have to understand if we're going into that part of the brain that we're not going to reason and understand and organize. We don't do really well in the back of the brain. We have to be back up here. So there's some skills to get there. So fear of the unknown. That's just the definition of stress. It's very simple. It's just 4 words. Fear of the unknown is when we have change, and I have lots of parenting issues with this with kiddos. They come in and say, my kid throws a fit when we have to, go somewhere, or, when something is a big change and they don't understand what's happening. Well, that's because the fight response goes into action and your stress response just kicks in naturally, and cortisol is sent to your body, and your brain says, okay, you're going to die right now. So that's stress. And so you can look at some of these symptoms of stress and think, okay, am I burned out to the point of physical reaction where I'm not sleeping, where I'm having chest pain, I'm having nausea every day, and then the behavioral and the cognitive, are we, our focus is foggy, we're having brain fog. That's just the definition of the fear of the unknown. So, how do we get to clarity? And so this is a little bit more about understanding the fight, flight, or freeze response. So we all just kind of have a little lesson here about that. And so aggressive, passive aggressive, and passive goes with fight, flight, or freeze. Okay. And you probably have never seen this, because I've never seen this. And I've taught this class this way, for about 7 years. And so this is how we get to assertive, right? So a whole assertive class is a whole other hour, right? But really, all you need to know is we have to get back to here. We have to get out of our midbrain. And assertive is up here. So how do we get direct with respect? And how do I say, I feel and I need and I'm willing to do this? That's every conversation, every relationship we've ever had. Those 3 things is all you need to know. Besides, crucial conversations, it's a whole book, but this, so it's like, but really that's all you need to know to get assertive. But you have to know how you feel. So that's an emotional, IQ. And then it's like, you have to know your need. And then you have to know what your boundaries are, what you're willing to do and what you're willing not to do. It's like, I'm not willing to do that, but I'm willing to do this, So there's just a little bit of starting off this to help relationships and self-value is how to avoid aggressive, passive aggressive, and passive. And a lot of companies have asked for, there's a lot of irritability in the workplace, on the road, at home since COVID, right? That's why the fear of the unknown sends us into those 3 things automatically. We don't want to stay there. So how do we get out of that? Being assertive, again, which is not easy, because our natural survival brain says, no, just stay in survival mode and aggressive, or be passive aggressive. So you'll all, we all know those personalities and that behavior of others in our relationships, um, and how to have boundaries around that is essential. So, um, so if we're burned out, one of the ways that we don't get out of fight or flight is if we're burned out. So burnout, there's 5 different levels. I have a whole class on the YouTube about this that you can watch. So this is just a little bit of like, here's burnout, here's thriving, right? It's replacing this with this. It's not that easy, but we have to continuously get rid of thinking errors and shame and depression, anxiety, so we can hold the hurt. That's what that means. How do I hold the hurt that I've had? How do I attune with my, with my employees, with my employer? How do I get on the same page? Well, if we're burned out, we hold on to hurt. We hold on to, stuffing and denial. Irritability comes up, right? So this is just a little bit of like how to get balance is opposite of burnout. And there's this, my little four balances there. Covey has your emotional and spiritual in a different category. I always put emotional and spiritual in one category, then your physical, your mental, your social. So you kind of check in with yourself and say, where am I at and where am I unbalanced? Because if you are not grounded and balanced, you cannot put boundaries up and be assertive, because you're going to go into, if you're just fatigued. So sleep, right? Sleep right here, physical is my number 1. So we got to sleep. We got to sleep, and we got to sleep good. And compassion fatigue is a long definition there. You can read it later. But compassion fatigue is when burnout joins with secondary trauma. So if you guys are caregivers, they're caseworkers. I've been a foster parent. It's like I've worked with some of those caseworkers. I worked with them for 10 years as a foster parent. And it's like, whatever you're doing, I promise you we're probably in a caring, for others industry. And what happens is when we're caring for others, we neglect to care for self. And that turns into burnout, which turns into, and then you take on secondary trauma from other people. So those two combined turns into compassion fatigue, and we lose our empathy. And then we're fatigued. And then there's those danger signs on there. It's like, so if you see someone in your circle, in your team, in your coworkers, that you feel like they've got to compassion fatigue, we need some help. We need some therapy. We need some regrouping. We need some grounding. We need some balance, because that leads into long-term, it's called habitual burnout. Habitual burnout is not where we want to be. It leads to severe depression and health issues. I'm a big physical nutrition, it leads to health problems. So look at those and just warning signs. So everybody, all your staff, anybody that you come across with, even your teenagers, this is happening a ton. It's like compassion fatigue. We don't have much empathy for others. So anywho, that's a little bit of that. And loss and grief. So we have to go into that because that's next. So if we're in loss and grief, look at those definitions and just see where you're at. And it's like, it's okay to grieve. Understand that COVID is a loss, grief, and trauma. Like just that. And so we've gone through lots. And when we add change to it, the fear of the unknown, we get into lots of loss and grief. And that's what's really going on. And so we have to regroup with some of those. Like I have just an example of depression down here about a kiddo, right? So it's just an example of like repeated statements of wanting to join someone that's passed on, and withdrawal from friends, fatigue, low energy, and anger. Those are outbursts and sleep disturbances. And if you're having those, it's not clinical depression. It's just the start of some of those things. We want to really assess that, pretty soon, sooner than later. And then, school performance, your job performance. So just relate that to yourself if you need to. But yeah, so there we go. It's like, okay, one of my favorite quotes from Aristotle is like, we can be angry, and we can be, you know, with anybody. But the thing is being being passionate and being angry with the right person, at the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, is really actually difficult. So if you're all like, okay, let's get passionate about this, but it's that is not within everybody's power, and it's not easy. So we want to say, okay, what are we getting passionate about? What are we, you can be angry, but do it the right way with the right person for the right purpose, you know. And so that brings me to conflict. Like, how do we now manage conflict when we do get into aggressive and defensiveness? The clues are it's physiological, it's physical, it's behavioral, and it's super emotional. So that's all fight, flight, or freeze, right? So all of that's in the midbrain. So this is just so when you're thinking about change, clash of interest, bam, right? We have a clash of interest. So it's like, well, I don't agree with my, with my supervisor on this. I just see no value in this. I see that this can never help us. Then we regroup, right? And we say, okay, what's the conflict? Are we jumping to conclusions? Are we, do we have any compassion left? So compassion, this is, a Brene Brown thing, is like, it's connecting once again with the right person. Same with Aristotle, right person of the right issue at the right time. We can also be compassionate, or we can be angry. But yeah. And there's some tips to reduce the conflict if we're having conflict. So these are just some slides just for some knowledge in and how to do that. And of course, I talk a lot about habit 5 in Covey's 7 habits, right? So it's like, okay, how do we seek to understand so we don't get into a conflict as much as we need to? It says be emotionally intelligent. Second emotions I have on YouTube, emotional intelligence 1 and 2 for that. So you can watch those and say, how emotionally intelligent am I? Because remember, you have to say, I feel first. Yeah. So how do I feel? Yeah.
I just wanted to interject that some of our folks who are streaming don't see that link. I will be sending that out later. You can also see it here, but I will actually send that link to everyone who is registered.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. So YouTube channel under Blomquist, and then and there's some other ideas on here to how to stay present and how to do a timeout, and some conflict resolution on that. Okay. So how do we communicate this now? Because now we've got to figure out. Now we've figured out what the fear of the unknown is, and how to reduce conflict. But then how do we communicate when we resist change, Cameron?
Yeah. So I think each of us can relate at times in our work life where we have change that we're struggling with, right? And we're surrounded by people that are going through that same change with us. One of the challenges, though, is when we have put forth the effort to understand the change and are trying to do our best to work with it, even when it may be frustrating or we may not even agree with it. It can be really difficult when we've got people around us that are resisting that change and fostering a culture of negativity. So I think the question is, what do we do about that? How do we handle that? I think the first step in a situation like that, when you've got that person coming to you, is to first make them feel like they've been heard and express empathy, because you know what it's like. You're going through that same change as they are. But the important thing is that we don't fall captive to their negativity. And it's easy to become negative as a result of that, right? When someone's coming to you and they're like, this is the worst thing, and I don't know why they're making us do this, and it just doesn't make any sense. And in your mind, you might be thinking the same thing. Yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me either. The right thing to do, though, is to try and find the good in what is going around, and sometimes that's difficult. And some people may look at that as being superficial. But one thing that's important is that you look at, how is this going to impact my ability to do my job and potentially theirs too? What you have to do in those situations is focus on what you can control, and that's you, right? You can't control them, you can't control their behavior, you can control you. And it may get to a point where it would make sense to somewhat distance yourself from that person if you feel like that is hurting your own mental well-being and potentially your ability to move forward in your job, fulfill your responsibilities, etc. Doing that will lessen the likeliness of burnout, as Carol's been talking about. It's following into that negativity trap that will really lead you quickly to a place where work is even more difficult than it was before.
Yeah. So how do we get to that? So you mentioned, like, well, first we got to have clarity and understanding and empathy towards the person that's coming with a problem or with concerns. Let's just call it concerns. So this is a little recipe for habit 5. We first have to have space and a creative, create a safe and trusting time and place. And then we have a desire, we have hope, feelings, and need, right? So it's like, I feel this way, this is what I'm willing to, and this is what I need. And then it's value and respect, and that's love and belonging, right? So I have to feel like I belong. And once a person doesn't feel like they belong, it's really hard to bring them that back. But if we can do that before we get to step 4, empathy listening is like, okay, repair, reflect, repair. I'm a repair. Gottman, 40 years of research specialist in relationships, says conflict's not the problem. It's not the problem. It never has been. And your marriage will work, and this will work, and this will work if you know how to repair. Because we're all going to mess up. We're all going to say the wrong thing. We're all going to be in an unsafe situation. But the point is how do we rephrase and reflect and repair? So how do we get back to repair? You know what? I said the wrong thing. I didn't mean for that to happen. Let's start over. How do we do that? And because the hostile environment that Cameron's talking about is not healthy. We don't need bullying. We don't need shame. We don't need to feel less than and not belong. And that's a hierarchy need. Of course, that's level 3 up here of love and belonging on Maslow's hierarchy. So we do need that. And then mutual understanding, green light, means this. It's on this slide, it's just a recipe of, okay, this is red. We do not, when we're in high emotion, we take a break. That's all you need to know there. Yellow, we slow down and listen, watch for caution, and green light is, okay, I understand you. And now, let's understand each other, have a clear mutual understanding, and then converse, right? And that's crucial conversation stuff. And then you're asked to give advice and your opinion. That's the very last step. We love to, we go to logic and we go to fix, right? And we need to not go there that fast. So there's, and I know these slides these are just for later. You guys can, go through these. These are my steps to get to motivation too. How do you get someone motivated to, I know there's some questions about that later that we can go over, and we can go back to this slide about how do we get to motivation ourselves. Number 1, self-discipline. Number 2, delaying gratification. Number 3, you got to have a reward system. If you guys all didn't get paid, I joke about this all the time. Let's see how Cameron likes this. If I got paid a year in advance and I got my salary a year in advance, would I be in Cancun or would I be a really crappy employee? Or would I have some integrity and be like, I love my job, I got paid a year in advance, I'm going to go a whole year without seeing a paycheck? It's really difficult. I have to work to get my paycheck in 2.5 weeks. There's a reason for that. We have to have a reward system. And those little reward systems have to be 10 minutes to 2 hours of a distraction for ourselves. When I wash my car, it takes me 15 minutes and it's my best reward of the week. I schedule it, actually. I'm crazy with my reward system. So those are some things there. And then, now. So say you're struggling with all these things, right? And you're struggling with change, you're struggling with mental health, you're struggling with grief and loss, you're burned out, and you know it. And you're like, okay, I'm going to go talk to a Blomquist therapist. I'm going to get back, in my grounding activities. So how do you go talk to your supervisor about this? Cameron, how do we do that?
Yeah, so this is a tough one. I'm sure a lot of you have had thoughts about, do I talk to my supervisor about my mental well-being? Does it make sense? And that really is a question that, you'll need to think of for yourself. And when you're having those conversations, what are you comfortable sharing? That's totally up to you. Let me give you an example. I had an employee come to me, and she had been struggling with depression. I didn't know that as her supervisor. And she came to me because she was making some changes to her medications. And she was noticing that it was making her a little bit more irritable. And so she came to me and she said, I just wanted you to know that I do struggle with depression and I'm making some changes in my meds. And I've noticed it's made me a little bit more irritable. And I just wanted to give you a heads up. I don't expect it to impact my job performance. And so if for some reason I respond a little bit different than I normally do, I just thought you would want to know why. And what that did is it really opened up a conversation between myself and her, even into the future. I would periodically just check in and say, hey, how are things going? Were you able to get your meds stabilized? Are you feeling better? And she's like, yeah, actually things have been going well. And it really strengthened our relationship. Now, I recognize that that's not always going to be the case, but I do think there is some value in having that conversation. Just like if you went to your supervisor because you had an accident and slipped on the ice and broke your arm. You're going to tell them that. And there may be times where it would make sense to have that same conversation in regards to your mental well-being. But what's important is that you focus on your job performance. You're telling your supervisor this not because you necessarily want them to be your therapist, but you want them to be able to understand your situation so that you can be most successful you can in the position you're in. And as Carol talked about, there's resources that you have available to you as an employee when you need help beyond what you may be getting at work.
Yeah. So, yeah, and when to reach out. That's always a tough thing, because when I see employees coming to me in therapy of like, I'm struggling with my, job performance. And I'm like, okay, how much are you being impaired right now by your mental health? So then you say, this is, some questions, right? So how much self-soothing do you do and mindful focus and what support do you have, right? So support's huge. So then we go into support system and we go, okay, what support do you have? Oh, we need some more support. So, I think it's a good time to talk to your supervisor. How do you have a relationship? Well, I don't know if he would judge me, she would judge me. Okay, well, let's present it this way. And you can role play that and just, because like Cameron said, it's definitely, when you know what's going on instead of guessing, it's so much better, because you're jumping to conclusions when you're guessing. Remember clarity, what we started out with. We got to have clarity. So how balanced are you? Have you used your time off? Do you know how to say no? A lot of people in America, statistically America, do not take their time off. People live 6 years longer when they have a vacation planned every year. 6 years longer on average. So you got to take your time off. Take some reward. That's a reward to me. So do you celebrate your work? If you're not celebrating any part of your work, you need to regroup what you're doing. Do you play and relax, right? So your environments up here, there's 9 environments that gives you power, and then your bowl is filled. That was my own little analogy. I'm a visual, so everything's a visual. Here's a bowl, I'm going to add it, and it's going to get to the top, and that gives you your power. Because, I like a full bowl of cereal. I like a full bowl of salad, whatever it is, I like food. So let's put it all in there. So, and here's some tips, are you going to just put a Band-Aid on it, or you're going to have setbacks? You're going to have low self-esteem. You're going to go into fight or flight all the time. You're going to be burned out. Band-Aids are great. They stop the bleeding for a moment, and they actually can heal a little scab, right? But if it's a cut, a Band-Aid's not going to work. And so real quick, we're going to just go into right now of tips. So temperature, IPP. So temperature, super simple. These are 10-minute distractions you can use. When you have to leave a meeting, before a meeting, when you have to leave your desk, when you are, triggered, activated, I call it, at home with a relationship. These are things that we've got to do that immediately do a state change. A state change is a mind state change. It's up here. It actually changes your nervous system. So these are very quick 5 to 10 minute things. Get temperature. You have a hot shower, cold shower. You go get ice cubes, put it in your hands and squeeze the ice cubes even. That's a 30-second thing. It actually changes the state of your body. So intense aerobic exercise, I always just say, go do 10 jumping jacks. If you can leave the space and go to a different space, paced breathing, 4 square breathing, it's just up 4, hold it for 4, down 4, wait 4. And I have you do this, so you can tap. And then paired muscle relaxation, that's why squeeze balls work. So put them in both hands though. Squeeze, let go, squeeze, let go. So those are some state changes to get yourself back on track. And here's a whole list of mental health thriving tips. So you can look at that little checklist. If you need to reach out, there's crisis line, domestic violence, suicide lines. Utah Safe app is an awesome app for teens and kids and all of us. So, and there's questions and answers. So let's get some questions.
Okay.
And I'll put it back up. So if the ones that can see my screen, you can go through this little checklist while we're doing that.
Okay. We have a few questions that have been submitted, and they kind of follow on some of what you've already spoken about so far. So you mentioned looking out for colleagues and not getting mired in negativity. Is there an effective way to let a manager know when morale is sinking? Oftentimes employees are very aware and may be aware before supervisors are, especially when the span of control is very large. A supervisor may supervise a number of people. How do I do that as an employee without being punished for being the bearer of bad news?
Yeah, so I have some thoughts on that, JJ. I think one of the things that I found has worked well for me, and I've been in a similar situation as the one you just described, where I kind of had a sense morale was heading south, and I don't know that my supervisor was really familiar with the situation. And sometimes bring that up to a supervisor, they can interpret that as being like you're questioning how good of a job they're doing and may be defensive over it. What I found seems to work best is, rather than going to your supervisor and saying, here's the problem, morale's going to pot, going to them with suggestions on how we could improve morale. And so it's not necessarily going to them and saying morale's bad, but saying, hey, just in my interactions with our team, here's some things I noticed that I think others might find valuable. And then give those suggestions and also be willing to help implement them. And I think that will go a long way in helping to not only provide suggestions, but also helping them realize, well, if this is being suggested, there may be a problem with morale without having to cause a situation that's defensive or uncomfortable.
Right. Okay. Times, I imagine there will be times when an individual just needs to remove themselves from a toxic coworker. How would you suggest a person go about doing that in a rational way, and in a way that they have authority to control?
Are you talking just in general, like just in passing, in regular work, or they're on the same team or in a meeting?
Right.
How do you get out of the toxic conflict?
Yeah, I would assume that it would be most critical in a situation where you're working day to day with a particular individual who just feels toxic.
Right. So that's where we go into what am I being activated by this toxic person, right? Because there's these things that, so someone's like a little passive aggressive, back to that, you know, they're a little passive aggressive, and somewhere in your past, passive aggressive activates you. Like, just be straight with me. Don't be, you know, condescending or criticizing me or critical of something, you know, so behind your back, right? So that's toxic.
Mm-hmm.
That's toxic. That's also passive. It's just basically, I call it passive aggressive. When we get into manipulative or vindictive or gaslighting, we've got some big things going on there. And I do have a really good PowerPoint for that too. It's called Boundaries with Toxic People. So, you know, there's just ways that you like what do we have control over? Well, we have control over not shaming and being passive aggressive back, because that's called bullying and that's called persecution. So if someone's toxic and saying, here's the toxic situation, and then when you need to, you go to superiors, right? And saying this person is like actually harassing, toxic, passive aggressive, being, you know, a bully. So how, you know, yeah. And then another question came through is like, what if that's your supervisor? You know, you can talk to, you know, one of our therapists about that, confidential, and say, okay, how do I deal with this behavior? Because it's not healthy. And then HR, and then someone above that, if we need to go through the chains of, you know. So if that helps, I mean, of course, you have to know what you need, what you're being triggered by, so you can step out of it and not get emotionally involved. I call it, make it a business deal. If you make it a business deal, do you do business with toxic people? How do you deal with people that are, you know, don't have integrity, say, or are passive aggressive? You bully them back, or you get assertive. So.
Okay, I see. We were talking earlier on, I'm shifting gears to a different question here. We were talking earlier on about jumping, it's that fight or flight response, I suppose. And what sometimes comes along with that is in a great imagination, right? I invent all the worst things that could possibly happen. Do you have some ways to
what you're
control that?
Yeah, and what you're talking about there is called ANTs, automatic negative thoughts. So, and that is also the thinking error story. So Crucial Conversations talks about how we blow up this story. We go to the worst, right? And there was another question kind of about that. How do we have, what if we're dealing with someone that goes automatic, the worst thoughts ever, the story that goes into overgeneralization, jumping to conclusions, you know, all or nothing thinking. That's all, you know, that's all thinking error stories. And there's 10 of them. And with that one scenario of someone that jumps into a story of automatic, the worst scenario ever, has all 10 of those thinking errors going on at one time. Mm-hmm. And it's not in your frontal lobe. So when you're dealing with someone that does automatic thoughts that are not facts, they're thinking errors, you go back to the facts, and that's when I write them down. Get on the whiteboard. The facts are, we don't know when this will start. The facts are, what was working in our department before was not working. So this is what we're going to try to work. So here's the facts. You only have the facts, and you reiterate the facts in present time. So if that helps, whiteboards, writing them down. Okay, so you jump to conclusions, and we're going to go back to the facts and call it, you know, right? And and how do we not do that ourselves is the fear of the unknown and stress. Remember, so what we don't know, we don't have clarity. We jump to a whole bunch of thinking errors, and it really messes us up. And then we ruminate on that. And like I was saying earlier, in another presentation, we actually marinate that. And then we marinate the ribs for weeks. And it's like, eat the ribs already. Just eat them. Just try it. And if it doesn't work, do we try something else? Right? So I like the facts. Yeah, stay with the facts. And then, Crucial Conversations book, it's like, okay, how do we get rid of those thinking error stories? But they come from our childhood. They come from the past. They come from all that stuff. So we have to kind of put that on the table.
Sure. One of our listeners indicated that they know something about themselves, that it takes them a little time to adjust to a change.
Right.
But there's another situation that comes up there that causes some anxiety. How does a person that needs a little time to adjust keep from getting left behind in the change?
So if I can, again, Cameron, if you have anything, you jump in. Number one is boundaries. If you know that about yourself, I teach people how to have boundaries. If you say, okay, hey, I'm going to need 30 minutes, or tomorrow at 3, I'm going to have to process this. So same thing with the child. You give them a 10-minute warning, or do you give them a 30-second warning when there's change happening? Every time that child will have a fit or fight you if you don't give them 2 choices and time to process it. Now, that's not always feasible, right? It's like, nope, actually, we have to go now. But can you give them a 2-minute warning? Yeah. So it's if they need processing time, that person has to say, okay, so I need a little more processing time on this. Can you come get back with me? Can we have a meeting tomorrow at 3, or can you email me some more details? Because I'm really confused, and right now I'm just really flooded. That's the fight, flight, or freeze, flooded. And so flooding, you will not reason with a person. You will not teach a person anything. So you got to get them back to, so that's time, taking a time out.
Right. That makes sense. And earlier we had talked about, or in the earlier session, advice was given to managers that it's probably not a good idea to make a big change announcement and then say, and now on to other business. So this is, from an employee standpoint, we need the same amount of time to adjust to change, right? And it may be the opposite way. You have something to say about that, Cameron?
Yeah, I would just add to what you're saying there, JJ, is, if you already know that that's how you respond to change, and when something comes like that, and to Carol's point about needing to process that, the good thing is that hopefully you're surrounded by people that can help you with that, because they're either going through the same change, and in particular, ideally your supervisor. So, for example, with the team that I work with, when we have hard things or changes that are coming up, and we talk about those, I can almost tell you which ones of those it's going to be good for me to follow up with them to process, or they'll reach out to me to process that. And that's great. That's the way it should be done, right? And so the hope is that, and this is also something we talked about earlier, is if you are not having regular communication with your supervisor, go to them and see if you can set up a regular time to visit and meet. I shared an example earlier where I used to work with someone, my supervisor, he was tough. He was a hard guy to work with. I really struggled with him. And I didn't know where I stood most of the time. I never knew if, when I did talk to him, if it was going to be a good or a bad conversation. And through getting help from someone else, he helped me realize, you got to improve your communication with this guy. You need to meet with him more regularly, because we weren't. Sometimes I wouldn't see him for 3 or 4 weeks. And so I started meeting with him more regularly. And it helped with that. So when there were changes coming, sometimes it would allow for a heads up before we had the meeting where everybody was there. And that, for a person that's struggling with change and know they do, you can have those conversations ahead of time if you're having that one-on-one meeting with your supervisor. And if we're not able to have it ahead of time, you can process it with them after the fact. And once again, you don't want to go to them and say, this is a complete disaster. It's better to go to them and say, this is going to be hard for me, but here's some things that I think will work well for me to process this and to keep up with everybody and all the changes. And here's how I see some ways that you could support me in that. And hopefully, when you're taking the initiative, they'll be willing to jump in and help you with the situation.
Okay, thank you. You know, all of us here, I think, work for one large organization, you know, the state of Utah. And some of our agencies individually are pretty large as well. And change is one thing, but would you have some different advice to cope with radical shifts on the daily or weekly when you might come in and do one process and the next day it's completely changed around due to whether politics or change in personnel or what? Are there any, you've touched on a number of things to do here. Are there any specific different things in that kind of situation that you would advise?
You know, I would maybe add to my comments I made a moment ago is if you're look for ways to have those frequent conversations with your supervisor to see if they can somewhat give you a heads up when those things are coming and when it's constant. And sometimes they won't know. I mean, that's just the reality. Sometimes things come down from the pipe and we don't know they're coming, and we kind of have to deal with them as they come. And there's no question that that can be challenging and stressful. But I think if we're trying to really be one step ahead, it may make it a little bit easier.
Okay.
Yeah, and on that is that I think about, you know, think of your developmental span and how much change goes on just with life, right? And when we have added all of this change, COVID, you know, our kids, you know, school, how all this has impacted our lives, and people that are in a fixed mindset already will not deal with it well. This is a scientific term by Carol, my book's right up there, Carol Dweck, and I don't have her referenced, but fixed mindset, growth mindset. So I think of, like, you know, you look back and think of yourself and all the changes that have happened in your life that you did not, that you were blindsided by, that you did not predict. I didn't predict this with my kids. I didn't predict loss. I didn't predict divorce. I didn't predict that my parents would get sick early on in my life. I wouldn't predict, you know, I wouldn't put this on anybody, your traumas. So it's really how you deal with that change, but it's also, to me, I'm just a trauma focused, like, how has change shown up in your life, your whole entire life? And so it's really difficult, and how to seek support when there is change. You call someone, you ask for help, you pay for someone to do your yard or clean your house. You know, I would say, who can you pay to take that off your plate? Because I'm a big, take it off your plate. So how can we take something off our plate when there's big change happening? Because balancing is key, but burnout is what happens if you have too much on your plate with too much change. So delegate.
So delegation isn't just for supervisors, is what you're saying.
Every day of your life, all day, and then to be balanced, you know, so.
Right, right.
Carol, I mean, do you mind maybe even clarifying a little bit more? Well, I think you're touching on an excellent point about the delegation, but how do we do that better?
Yeah, so with my majority of my clientele, which is very large span, because I see people about every month, and this is the biggest issue I see right now, is I've got so much on my plate. I'm overloaded. That's that overwhelming. I'm overloaded. How do we put down one ball? Just one juggling ball. So you have to look at your balance, write that down. And the first thing I do is, where is your time, energy, money going? Where's your value system? And in life, because we're talking about employee, but this is everywhere in your life, right? If you're really juggling so much at home, are you going to be able to juggle the change at work? No, you're going to really struggle. And that's what happened. COVID put us into that acute stress that turned into adjustment disorder that can turn into PTSD. That's what that does. So if you don't get your plate clear of just one thing, how do I put down one ball? And that's delegation. Like I said, that's letting go of something and saying no. That's being assertive. That's boundaries. So Brene Brown's research, the way that her 20 years of thousands of people she interviewed, it all comes down to one word, and that is boundaries. One word. Everybody that was shame resilient, that had vulnerability in their life, that was emotional intelligent, that was, my favorite book, Gifts of Imperfection, how do we live wholeheartedly and put down the balls, is boundaries. So if that's a boundary saying, I can't take that on, or how can I give myself more time to this or that? But then the next question is, how, when people violate your boundaries and you say, you know what, I'm just gonna have to say no to that. I can't put that on my plate right now. And then it's like, yeah, that sounds awesome. That sounds awesome, Carl. No one talks like that. No one has boundaries. You just have to do what we're supposed to do. I've got my kids at home and I'm homeschooling and I'm working for, and so we've got to regroup. We've got to understand that there is just maybe too much on someone's plate, and delegate that out, have boundaries with that, and get back to what, we talked about, like doing your hobbies again. People are like, I've done my hobbies again, and for the last, that I hadn't done for 10 years. So balance in that, but.
You've mentioned COVID, and obviously there are other stressors that have also changed our environments and communities. And I think there's an important question that came up with the hostility and racism targeting people of color in our community and in our workplace. What are some ways to create a place of physical and emotional safety for oneself and others when you're not a manager?
You got thoughts on that one, Cameron?
Yeah, I mean, this is I think a topic that is definitely, raised. The awareness has been raised over the last year, and the sensitivity there is extremely important. And so I think and I think this applies to anybody, whether you see yourself in that situation or not. All of us need to have an awareness that we haven't had before. And I think a lot of that too is understanding the sensitivities around, race and hostility, as was asked in the question, and making sure that we are understand the sensitivities, are aware of the sensitivities, and are doing our best to accommodate those sensitivities. And really, it's for a lot of situations that may not always come easy or natural. And I believe it's something that we all have to educate ourselves on and spend time learning.
Yeah. Earlier, Carol, you used a different word for triggers. What was that word again? Oh, you're muted.
Activators. So
activators, yes.
I use the word activator because your physiological body, I'm always about your nervous system, sends cortisol, sends you to your back, your brain, is all inside your body first. You're always activated, your heart rate goes up, and that's a natural, survival skill. But we've got to come down out of that flooding.
Yeah. it's interesting because I think that these activators, I think it behooves us to be aware of other people's activators. I mean, if we get to know people that we work with,
Mm-hmm.
there are certain things that we can do that activate them, right? That get their feathers ruffled. And
Yes, yes, that's a good point. But also, we can't walk on eggshells around everyone else, and actually jump like and know and like mind read. It's called, right? Jumping to conclusions as mind read. So yes, if someone comes to you to their supervisor and say, "This really activates me that you don't give me time to process a big change." Okay, great. Then you know that, right? So you're going to be a little more sensitive. Sure, that's just empathy and belonging and love and having that skill. But we have to say, I can't walk on eggshells around someone that is constantly activated because everything activates them, right? So I'm not, just to jump to like a
sure,
scenario, but because there's a couple questions about like, I can't deal with someone that has a personality disorder. Well, we don't know, right? That's really difficult. Or, it's just a personality conflict, right? So that's where we
sure,
go into therapy and we say, how can I help this person? How can I help myself not be activated by their triggers, but being passive aggressive towards their triggers and being like, oh my gosh, get over it. Like, are you so sensitive again? Are you crying again? Like, can you not even get through a meeting? That's bullying.
right.
We don't want to
Unproductive, yeah.
so
Well, we are coming up on our time here, and I want to leave just a few minutes here for you to share what kind of services are available to state employees through Blomquist Hale, and I'll let you go for it.
Yeah, thanks, JJ. Yeah, so, and thanks for bringing that back up. Yeah, so here's a list, and also, I believe JJ and Deborah are going to be sending out some information too about what we do. But we like to tell people we are here to help with any of life's challenges. If you or a member of your family has something that you're struggling with, give us a call, and we will help. The phone number is here on the screen, and we are open 24/7. So if you've got something that's going on in the middle of the night, or a member of your family, and it's an urgent situation, give us a call. We've got someone that can help. And our benefit is available not just for you, but also for your family members. And then we also have an extended benefit that's available for first responders and their spouses. So in any of those circumstances, the easiest way to access this is to call that phone number. For those that are first responders, we have a team of people that are specifically trained and work regularly with first responders. Give us a call and we can help you work through that. If it's ever a time where you're not sure if we can provide help, give us a call. Chances are we can. And we want to make sure that you're taking advantage of this benefit that's been provided for you through your employer. And the great thing about it is no cost to you. It doesn't cost you anything to call us. It doesn't cost you anything to come see us. It doesn't cost you anything to participate in our services. We just want to make sure that you're getting the support you need.
Thank you very much, and thank all of you. Well, thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Carol, and thank all of you for being here with us this afternoon. And just to remind you again, we will send out the link to additional videos, as well as a recording of this session. And we hope to see you in future webinars. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.